All right, ready to dive into the world of Ed Seykota and the trading tribe?
Let's do it.
We're going to unpack his whole approach to personal growth, the trading tribe process, PCP as it's called, and see how it all connects to trading psychology, relationships, just living a more fulfilling life.
And what's so fascinating is that Seykota, he comes from this trading background, but his insights in the trading tribe, they really go way beyond just the stock market.
Totally.
He's tapping into something really fundamental about human nature, how our emotions, they kind of drive our decisions everywhere in all parts of life.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today, how to use Seykota's ideas to improve our trading, our relationships, just our own personal growth.
Sounds good to me.
Now, one of the first things that really jumped out at me was this concept of Fred. Who eyes Fred, and why should we even care what he has to say?
Okay, so imagine this. You're going about your day, making, logical decisions, planning your schedule, all that good stuff.
Right.
That's your conscious mind, hard at work. But then there's this whole other part of you, the intuitive part, the part that feels all those emotions really deeply and reacts instinctively.
Okay.
That's Fred.
Oh, I see. So he's like the voice in our heads that screams, "Look out,"
Mm-hmm.
right before we dodge, like a rogue frisbee or something.
Exactly. He's fast, intuitive, often picks up on things our conscious mind totally misses. And Seykota argues that we often ignore Fred, suppress him even, which can lead to bad decisions, unfulfilled lives, that kind of thing.
So it's about learning to actually listen to Fred instead of trying to silence him.
Precisely. And a big part of that, according to Seykota, involves confronting what he calls knots.
Knots, like emotional knots, because I've got a few of those I wouldn't mind. Untangling, let's just say.
Think of them as those suppressed emotions we all carry around.
Mhm.
Anger, jealousy, fear, feelings we try to bury deep down because they make us uncomfortable.
Oh, I know those feelings. Like, like that time I held back from telling a friend their new haircut wasn't exactly flattering, and it just ate away at me for weeks.
That, my friend, is a classic knot in action.
Yeah.
Seykota argues these suppressed emotions, they don't just vanish. They fester, and they end up impacting our thoughts, our decisions, our behaviors, often in ways we don't even realize.
So how do we actually start untangling these knots? Dakota's not suggesting we just like unleash our inner rage monster on unsuspecting friends and family, is he?
Not exactly, though he does emphasize the importance of physical expression when it comes to processing emotions. We'll get into that a bit later.
Okay.
But first, let's talk about the role of the tribe.
All right, so this is where the trading tribe part of the title comes in.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Seykota believes that creating a safe, supportive environment, a tribe, if you will, is really essential for this kind of work.
So kind of like a support group, but for people who want to like master their emotions and live more fulfilling lives.
That's a great way to put it. In a trading tribe meeting, people, they have the opportunity to explore their emotions openly, honestly, without any fear of judgment.
And this safe space, that's what Seykota calls the field of recognition. Right.
Got it. Creating an atmosphere of unconditional acceptance, where people feel comfortable expressing their true selves, even the messy parts.
That sounds incredibly powerful, but how does this actually play out in a trading tribe meeting? What are people actually doing? What are they saying?
Okay, so imagine you're in a room with a group of people who are all committed to personal growth,
Mm.
and supporting each other on that journey.
Okay.
One person volunteers to be in the hot seat, sharing an issue or a challenge they're facing that brings up some strong emotions for them.
Okay, so that sounds a little nerve-wracking, like stepping into the spotlight. So what happens next?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Remember how we were talking about physical expression?
Yeah.
Seykota, he believes that our bodies hold on to emotions in very real ways. So, in the trading tribe process, the person on the hot seat, they're encouraged to not just talk about their feelings, but to actually express them physically.
So are we talking like shouting, crying, maybe even some interpretive dance? I'm starting to see why that whole field of recognition is so important.
You're catching on. And while it might sound a bit strange, at first, this emphasis on physical expression, it's actually rooted in a really deep understanding of how our minds and bodies work together. By allowing ourselves to fully experience our emotions, physically and emotionally, in a safe and supportive environment, we can start to unravel those deep-seated knots that are holding us back.
This is fascinating stuff. We've covered a lot of ground already, Fred. Our intuitive selves, knots, those pesky suppressed emotions, the importance of expressing our emotions physically, and the power of the trading tribe and this feel of recognition.
And it all goes back to that idea of moving away from drama and toward a more fulfilling, authentic life. That's the why behind all of this.
So much to unpack. For our listeners who are eager to dive even deeper into this whole concept of forms and how to actually practice PTP, be sure to join us for part 2 of this deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we were really getting into it with Ed Seykota's The Trading Tribe, especially this whole idea expressing emotions physically through forms. So how do those forms actually play out in a trading tribe meeting? Like, paint us a picture.
All right, so picture this. You're in a trading tribe meeting, someone's in the hot seat. They volunteered to unpack a personal issue, something that's bringing up some really strong emotions for them.
Okay, sounds intense already, but we've got that field of recognition you mentioned, right? So everyone feels safe and supported.
Exactly. It's all about creating that safe space.
Yeah.
So the person on the hot seat, they start talking about their situation. And their tribe, everyone else in the meeting, they're totally tuned in. Not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it.
Yeah.
Looking for those forms, those physical signs of their emotions.
So we're talking like body language, tone of voice, that kind of thing.
Precisely. Could be a furrowed brow, clenched fists, a shaky voice, even a nervous foot. Tap those subtle or sometimes not so subtle ways our bodies kind of betray our feelings.
And then what? Does the tribe like try to analyze those forms like it's some kind of emotional puzzle?
That's where it gets really interesting. Instead of interpreting or offering advice, the tribe actually encourages the person to amplify those physical expressions.
Wait, so if someone's like tapping their foot nervously, the tribe would be all, tap that foot even harder. That seems, I don't know, a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it might seem that way at first. But the idea is that by really fully inhabiting that physical experience of the emotion, the form, you can actually access and process the emotion itself more effectively.
So it's like giving those suppressed emotions a physical outlet, a way to escape those knots we talked about.
Exactly. Seykota actually talks about how pent-up emotions can manifest as physical ailments if they're not addressed.
Yeah.
By physically expressing these emotions, we can release that pent-up energy in a healthy way.
That makes a lot of sense. But what kind of physical expressions are we talking about here?
Well, it really depends on the individual and the emotions they're experiencing.
Yeah.
It could be anything from shaking or shouting to crying or even laughing uncontrollably. Remember, it's not about forcing anything, but rather allowing the body to express what it needs to express.
That sounds like it could get pretty intense, especially for someone who's not used to expressing their emotions so openly.
It can be intense, but again, the tribe is there to support them through it, holding that field of recognition. And Seykota, he actually provides really specific guidelines and techniques for creating this safe and supportive environment.
So the tribe isn't just like a bunch of people watching someone have an emotional breakdown, right?
Yeah.
They're actively creating a safe space for that person to go through this process.
Exactly. And as the person on the hot seat goes through this process of expressing their emotions physically, they often experience this release of tension, this sense of clarity, even a shift in perspective on the issue that was bothering them.
It's like all those pent-up emotions are finally able to dissipate, and then clarity and insight can kind of emerge.
Right. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Seykota introduces this concept of reintegration, where the person actually tries to experience all those forms they've explored, all those different emotions simultaneously.
Wait, hold on. So if someone's been shouting and shaking and crying, they're now supposed to do all of that at the same time? How is that even possible?
It might sound strange, but Seykota argues that this process of reintegration, it can actually lead to a really profound sense of peace and wholeness. He calls it reaching the 0 point.
The 0 point, like a state of emotional neutral.
Exactly. It's like all those conflicting emotions, all those different forms, they kind of cancel each other out, and you're left with this incredible sense of calm and clarity. It's a powerful experience, and it's something that can have a really lasting impact on the individual's emotional well-being.
So it's not about like eliminating our emotions altogether, but rather about learning to experience them fully and integrate them into our sense of self.
Precisely. And once someone reaches this 0 point, those individual forms, those emotional triggers, they often lose their power. They might try to access that anger or that sadness again, but it's just not there in the same way. They've moved through it.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to ask, how does this translate to, real life situations outside the trading tribe meeting? Does Seykota offer any guidance on how to apply these principles in our daily lives?
He does. And that's what we'll explore in part 3 of this deep dive. We'll look at how the trading tribe process can help us navigate relationships, make better decisions, ultimately live more fulfilling lives. So stick with us.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Ed Seykota's The Trading Tribe.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and I'm really curious to see how this trading tribe process, this PTP, can actually be applied outside those structured tribe meetings,
Hmm.
in everyday life.
Yeah, it's a great question. And Seykota does address that. He says that the principles of PTP, they can be so valuable in all sorts of real-life situations, from relationships to making decisions, even in our trading.
Okay, well, let's start with relationships. I mean, we all know those can get a little complicated, especially when emotions are running high. How does PTP help us navigate those and build healthier, more fulfilling relationships?
Well, one of the biggest things we learn from PTP is this idea of taking the sender, really trying to focus on the person and their emotions instead of getting caught up in what they're saying, especially if it feels like an attack.
So instead of immediately getting defensive or firing back some witty retort, we pause and try to understand what the other person is actually feeling.
Exactly.
Mm.
Seykota gives this really interesting example in the book. A wife gets upset with her husband because he got her a turkey roaster for Valentine's Day.
Ouch. Yeah, not exactly the most romantic gift.
Right. So in a typical situation, she might just lash out, criticize him for not being thoughtful, not understanding her.
I can see that happening.
But a husband who's skilled in PTP, he might respond differently. He might acknowledge her feelings. Say something like, "Hey, I hear that you're upset. Can you tell me more about how you're feeling?"
So he's validating her emotions without getting defensive or trying to explain himself right away.
Exactly. He's creating that field of recognition we talked about, that space of acceptance and understanding.
And by doing that, he's allowing her to actually process her emotions without making the conflict worse.
Precisely. And this taking the sender thing, it's not just for romantic relationships. It can apply to all sorts of relationships with our partners, our family members, our friends, even at work with colleagues.
It's like a superpower for communication. But what about decision making? Does Sakota offer any advice on how PTP can help us make better choices in our lives?
He does. And it goes back to this idea of responsibility versus causality. Seykota argues that we spend so much time trying to find the cause of our problems, you know. We blame external factors or other people for our situation.
Oh, I know that pattern well. It's so easy to get stuck in that blame game.
Right. But PTP, it encourages us to shift that focus, to take responsibility for our own feelings and our own choices.
So instead of saying, this person made me feel this way, we say, I'm feeling this way and I'm choosing to respond in this way.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's powerful.
It's like recognizing that no matter what's happening around us, we still have the power to choose how we respond.
Precisely. And Seykota even applies this to trading, which, I mean, it makes sense given his background, right?
Right.
He says that really successful traders, they focus on managing their own risk and sticking to their systems instead of trying to predict the market or control it, which is impossible.
So it's about taking responsibility for your own trades, your own decisions, instead of blaming the market when things don't work out the way you hoped.
Exactly. And that applies to life too, don't you think?
I think so. It's about focusing on what we can control, our emotions, our reactions, our choices, and letting go of that need to control everything and everyone else.
And by doing that, we often find a lot more peace. It's not about pretending our emotions don't exist. It's about learning to experience them fully, to understand them and make conscious choices about how we respond.
That's such an important message. And while we've been diving into these ideas through Ed Seykota's book, The Trading Tribe, these principles, they really resonate far beyond just trading, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think this is really about personal growth, about building stronger relationships, and ultimately about living a life that feels more authentic and fulfilling.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a good reminder that our emotions aren't the enemy. They're actually powerful sources of information that can help us grow and connect with ourselves and with others on a deeper level.
Well said.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Trading Tribe. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time, ready to explore some more fascinating ideas together.